Hey guys, welcome back to Face to Face with Terrence Weaver. I'm Terrence, and again we have another exciting guest today. If I have to go back in my darkest hour, I was talking about a time where I was going to create or commit suicide. I'm down on my knees with a gun to my head, and what ended up happening after that was godsend. To be honest with you, what ended up happening was I ended up going to work. My boss handed me a bracelet that had a scripture on it that he ended up getting 3 weeks prior to me having this thought in my mind. And that bracelet ended up being, I would say, like having a stronghold on my life to guide me to where I needed to be. And the amazing part about it is I had that bracelet for a really long time, and it was a reminder to me of a scenario, a situation that I had overcome. But suicide really is something that has a stronghold on a lot of people in this world. And the crazy thing is, that wasn't even the first time that I thought about committing suicide. The very first time, which I talk about in this chapter, The Unspoken Killer, I was in high school. And in high school, at the basketball game, at the end of the basketball game, I ended up leaving out, got in the car, and I felt like I'm going to say in the book, I said there's a spirit sitting in the car. As in the unspoken killer, as in like a demonic or a feeling that I had sitting in the car waiting on me. So when I got in the car, put my foot on the clutch, shift the gears, and proceeded to crank the car up, I went into this dark place in my life. And again, my mom had just died a couple weeks earlier. I went to the basketball game to get out of my head so I can be around people, feel normal. But at that moment, I was sitting in that car. I ended up cranking the car up, start crying. A lot of emotions came over me, thinking about the past, the present, and the future. Put the car in gear. First gear, put my foot on the clutch, put my foot on the gas, and just revved the engine up and just took off. It was about 200 yards before I hit a tree, this humongous tree I had my eyes set on. And as I'm shifting gears, crying and screaming out loud, closed my eyes. And on the other side of opening up my eyes, I missed the tree by 2 feet, which is crazy. But now that I think about it, I was like going through something. I didn't know what I was going through. I didn't know how to tell people. I was experiencing it. I was in depression. And there was a lot of things going on in my life that I couldn't really talk about. But yet a lot of people knew the hurt and the pain that I was going through. It's a very dark place. But the unspoken killer, which I refer to in this chapter as suicide, is real. It's real in a lot of our lives. Whether you're married, whether you're single, whether you're young, whether you're old, rich, poor, black, white, it doesn't matter. A lot of us are connected through this suicidal thing through depression. And I think that depression is something that's really real. And a lot of people are suffering silently, if I can be honest with you. But this chapter, as I wrote it, I was able to connect with a friend, Blossom, an amazing individual that was going through something on her own. And as I wrote this chapter and got to know who she was, I realized that she was suffering and going through something totally different in her own season of life. And today I wanted to bring her to the camera so you guys can understand and see who she is. But we don't have Candace with us today. It's just me. So hopefully you guys can bear with me. You're really going to be face to face with Terrence. Enjoy what we have, and we're going to bring Blossom on. Well, everyone, I want to welcome Blossom. Blossom, if you can, before you start, I want you to read an excerpt from the book so people can understand who you are. And then we'll go into talking about why you're here and what we hope to get out of this session. Cool?
Awesome.
Perfect.
So I'm just going to read the portion, a few little snippets of the portion that I had written for you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Blossom and I have a story to tell. I write with tears in my eyes as the end of a dream comes to a more abrupt and painful halt than I could have ever imagined. As you may have seen on Facebook, my new status is single. I've heard the stories being shared and I know there's a lot of speculation, so I thought I'd let you all in on my side of the story. When I met my husband, he had overcome so much. His background was so similar to mine, and with pasts as similar as ours, how could we not have the same views on life, right? We'd both been abused as children, both came from broken homes, both were lonely and seeking direction and guidance. We both wanted to make something of ourselves. We had ambition and drive and a desire to succeed. I thought he was perfect. He was the man I had made a list about. He was my dream come true, my Prince Charming, come to rescue me. Of course, I had a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that something wasn't right, but I decided to ignore it.
Wow.
After all, it was just the rest of my life I was thinking about.
Wow. So you mean to tell me that this was your dream come true? He was the man that you're supposed to marry. He was the one that you've been waiting on.
That's what I thought, yes.
Wow. So for a lot of you guys who don't know, Blossom, who real name is
Shannon Joy.
Shannon Joy, and you're gonna hear me call her Shay. I've known Shay now for a long time. We actually went to school together. For how many years now have we known each other?
Next year will be 20 years.
About 20 years. Wow.
Yeah.
And at Evangel University where we met, we've been friends now for a long time. And even while she was in school, I didn't know a lot of the things that you went through in life. Later on, after she got married and God put this book on my heart, we decided to write it. Mm-hmm. And that's when I got to understand and hear some of the things that you went through. So now this guy that you met, how did you guys meet?
We actually worked together for 2 years before we got together.
Okay. 2 years. Mm-hmm. And in working together, you guys realized that you wanted to be together,
Yeah, we went to a leadership conference in Franklin, Tennessee, and ended up staying up all night talking, and were in love the next day.
Okay. So is it something quick as far as your marriage?
It was.
Getting married or dating? Or?
We got married 3 months after we started dating, which was extraordinarily fast. That is very common,
okay.
And it's a huge red flag in abusive relationships. They want it to move faster because they can't keep the facade up as well. And so moving fast in a relationship is typically a huge red flag for domestic violence.
So who was able to notice these red flags?
You
didn't.
Actually, a lot of people noticed. My friend Sarah was the primary person who was warning me and telling me that I needed to slow things down and make sure that I knew who I was getting involved with. And we're still friends today. We talk about that.
Wow. That is amazing. Thank you, Sarah, for stepping in and being that person for her. Because there's a lot of kids who get married or in their 20s who get married and their parents would tell them like, wait, slow down. He is not the person for you. She is not the person for you, because they raised you. They understand your morals, your values that they instilled inside of you. And they're like, hey, that's not the person. But yet we don't listen to them.
Yeah.
So did you listen to her or what happened?
I did not. I did marry him against the warning of not just Sarah. There were several other people who were just like, slow down. What are you doing? Why are you moving so fast? Is this necessary? And, then I had the gut feeling that something was wrong. The night before we got married, I remember crying and being like, I don't know if I can do this.
Wow.
And I should have listened to that.
Wow. So for the guys and gals who have not read this story, The Unspoken Killer, again, is a talk about suicide and depression and the things that we go through. But there's always a driving force, in my mind, a driving force that will push certain things or feelings or the notion of suicide, such as depression or living life, some of the things that you go through. And Shannon, went through an abusive relationship with her ex-boyfriend, ex-husband, husband at the time, and she didn't even see the signs in the beginning, from my understanding, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So can you walk us through some of the things that you encountered in your relationship with him? What were signs? Because I know there's a lot of women out there who are experiencing or in love with a guy, and their parents or friends may be saying, hey, slow down a little bit. He's not the one. And just like you just gave us a red flag, you said, hey, if the person is pushing you really fast, they have an agenda.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the primary signs that you see in domestic violence is that really fast, passionate, madly in love after a day or a week or very brief period of time. The other things that you can look for, they feel amazing, but they've put you on a pedestal and they don't actually know who you are.
Wow.
And so they're idolizing you, but it's not actually you that they're idolizing because they don't know you. It's the idea of this relationship that they're idolizing. and they're pushing you forward. Everything is amazing. They connect with you on so many different levels. You talk all day and all night and neglect other parts of your life. That's typically something that happens. And then most of the time it feels so good that there's no way that you can tell that there's red flags. The primary way to tell that's a red flag in the beginning is the speed and the passion that are involved. A healthy relationship will start with getting to know each other, because you don't know if you like someone until you know them. And if you feel like you're in love with someone after one night of knowing them, then that's not real love.
Okay. So this is very interesting. So let me ask you this. Did you see signs? Was he pushing your friends out away, telling you not to hang out with them, trying to pull you in closer, saying, let me see your phone, let me see this? Was there that aggressiveness going on?
Not in the beginning. So in the beginning, until they are convinced and have you as their own, what they will do is they will treat you like you are the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Wow.
And what that does is it lays a foundation of you are this ideal that is so high that when you fall very, very hard. And it also locks you in, because when you think about this period of time that's this honeymoon phase, you always, once the abuse starts, you always want to go back to that, and they're capable of that. And so it puts you in this cycle of, oh, but he could be this person he was when I met him.
Wow.
And most abusers don't actually start abusing until after 18 months in studies.
So tell me about the first encounter with abuse with him. How did that look, or what happened?
So probably about 6 or 8 months into our marriage, we stopped sleeping in the same bed. And I remember going out there and asking, like, why, and he said something about how he was just uncomfortable sleeping with me. I think after that, it was the way that I loaded the dishwasher was incorrect, and it was annoying. And then after that, he would talk about my friends and say things like, oh, well, Sarah was my best friend, still is my best friend, but he would say things like, oh, well, she doesn't really know what you want or what you need for your life. Or talk about my family. Well, your family is, they don't really make the best choices, or just little tiny barbs against everyone that was in my world.
So he was trying to isolate you almost. Yes. At that moment it started.
Yes.
Okay.
But you don't recognize it because you're so in love with this person. And so you're like, oh, you're right, I've never thought about it that way. And it was a very interesting idea, especially like with the dishwasher situation, because you wouldn't think that that was something that would end up affecting you.
So the way you loaded the dishwasher?
The way I loaded the dishwasher was incorrect. So he had to show me how to do it. And then, he could get annoyed or irritated if it wasn't done correctly the next time. And then it would escalate to other things over time to where, the way I folded the towels, or if the floor wasn't mopped in a timely fashion, or as we had kids, it got even more intense over time.
And that controlling nature that's inside of him started to show itself slowly.
Yes.
Which is very typical of somebody in this scenario.
Yes.
And Sarah, being your friend, from the outside can look and see you're changing.
Absolutely.
Even though you couldn't even see it at the time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sarah ended up holding an intervention for me about 1.5 years after we got married, and said, Shannon, you're not the same person. You are sad all the time. You're not doing the things that you used to do. You don't hang out with anyone. Like, what's going on? And she held an intervention for me and actually, like, moved me out of my house because she was so concerned about my well-being.
So your own friends saw it again, try to rescue you, and you still didn't want it at that time?
We had been fighting at that point in time.
Was it verbally, physical?
It was only verbal at that point in time. And I felt like our communication was just off, so I thought it could be fixed.
Yeah.
I thought, if I was able to do more, or if I was able to figure out what was wrong with me,
Wow.
then I could make this relationship work. So even while I was living with Sarah, I was talking to him on the phone every day. We had a child at that time together. So I got pregnant about 6 months into our marriage. And so Jay was, I want to say, like 3 months old when I left, something like that. And so that was his reasoning for calling. The first day that I left, he called over 50 times. And Sarah was like, this is a red flag. Like, you cannot do this. But at that point in time, he had already been monitoring my phone usage. We had gone down to one car because it was more cost efficient.
Controlling.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. He almost sounds psycho. Like,
well, looking back,
yeah,
I would definitely be able to see that now. But I didn't know.
I mean, he was the love of your life.
Yeah.
He was your Prince Charming.
Absolutely.
To come rescue you.
Absolutely. And every time that we'd argue, I'd be like, oh, if I can just be a little bit better, if I can match that pedestal Shannon, then, our life will go back to what it was for the first 3 months.
Wow. That is crazy. So, you're married to him for 8 months. I mean, after 8 months, he stopped sleeping with you. Within 6 months, you guys are in the process of having a kid, your daughter.
My son.
Or your son.
Yeah.
Okay. Eventually you move out with Sarah because Sarah wanted you to come stay with her.
Mm-hmm.
So the verbal abuse started happening. You start seeing traits of him being controlling with his personality. So when did the physical aspect of it?
After I moved back, it was probably maybe 3 months after I moved back in with him. He grabbed me by the arm because I was trying to get out the back door. And that was the first time that he had ever touched me.
Wow.
And I said that if he ever touched me again, I would leave. Unfortunately, he gave it enough time, and there are cycles with abuse. So when you look at an abusive relationship, it's not abuse all the time. In fact, it's mostly good. Because abuse happens, and then you get this incredible, sweet honeymoon phase where nothing can possibly be wrong. And then you get back to the minor nitpicky things like, oh, you didn't load the dishwasher. Oh, you're making mistakes. Oh, you're doing this. Oh, you're wrong here. Oh my gosh, I just blew up and it's completely your fault because if you had done this, I wouldn't have responded that way. And that's the typical cycle of abuse. A lot of people think that abusive relationships are abusive all of the time. But the truth is, abusive relationships are actually really good at least half of the time. Wow. So good that it's almost worth staying for the abuse because the honeymoon phase is so exciting or glamorous or intense and passionate.
Did you know anybody else going through that same scenario that when you were going through it?
Not that I knew of at the time, but yes, I knew multiple people who were going through it. However, it was not publicized.
So everybody was hiding behind this facade as in they wanted their relationship or their marriage to seem normal even though they're suffering on the inside?
Absolutely. Our relationship looked absolutely perfect. We were small group leaders in our church. We had a little Victorian home. We had, his daughter from a prior relationship. We had my son, and eventually we ended up with another child together. And everyone thought we were the perfect family. So happy. Every post was, he's the love of my life. If you looked at us on Facebook, you would think that we were the sun, moon, and stars to each other because we only posted those good parts of our world.
And all of this is happening and you're posting this stuff as though everything's amazing, but yet it's horrible.
Yeah.
He's grabbed you by your arm. There's a physical abuse that's starting. And at what point did you say, this is enough. I can't take no more. What happened? What was the scenario that brought that on?
Unfortunately, it took a lot. So there was an episode. The police had been called to my house 3 times before I finally left.
Wow.
And when I did leave, I left in the back of an ambulance, and he left in the back of a police car.
An ambulance. Tell me about that story.
Okay. So, when our daughter was about 5 months old,
Mhm.
I decided to go out with a friend from church. And when I got back, he was angry. He was so angry. And we shared a car at the time. And he took the keys and he left. And then I went upstairs and I fed my daughter, and I hoped that he would calm down in the time that he was gone. I fell asleep feeding her. There were still dishes in the sink downstairs. And when he got home, he decided that those dishes in the sink needed to be done immediately because I was a lazy... Do you care if I cuss on here? Okay. I was a lazy piece of shit for leaving them in the sink and going out that night. And so he came upstairs. He woke me up, still in my daughter's room. I had fallen asleep in the rocking chair. He dragged me out of her room and threw me against the wall across the hallway. And I still wasn't aware of what I had done at that point. That was how I was woken up.
So he went out. Is this early in the morning? Like
it was probably like 2 a.m.
2 a.m.? Okay.
Yeah. Because he had been out. He decided when I got back that he wanted to go.
And that you should do dishes at 2 a.m.
2 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that fight actually escalated to the point where he choked me and I thought I was going to die. He threw me down the stairs. He shredded my arm and broke my wrist, and then threw me off a balcony twice.
Wow. So how does he throw you off the balcony twice? I mean, I know it sounds I'm being...
Yeah, no, you're fine. No.
I'm like, one time, I'm like, okay, but twice, like...
So our house was kind of on like a little hill, and so our front porch was up high, and so I had gone to get help because I didn't have my own phone. Again, we go back to that controlling factor. It wasn't budget friendly for us, even though he had a good job. And so I didn't have my own phone, so I went and I knocked on the neighbors' doors when he threw me down the stairs. Well, he took that opportunity to lock me out, and my kids were still inside. So I decided that I had to get my kids out, and so I had gone and knocked on neighbors' doors trying to find someone that I could call 911 or get help of some sort. And then I was like, I don't know what he's going to do with my kids. If you know anything about abusive situations, a lot of times when the perpetrator has children with the victim, they will use them as a tool, and a lot of times, unfortunately, children do get killed in those situations.
Wow.
And I freaked out and decided I was going to get inside and I was going to get my kids out with me.
I want to stop you right there for 1 second.
Okay.
We'll come back. How many of you guys know... Okay, apparently you're in an apartment, like you said, right?
We weren't
condo?
in an apartment. We were in an old Victorian home.
Okay.
But the porch was raised, and then we had a lower level underneath where the front door was.
So how far are your neighbors? Are they pretty close?
Pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's been scenarios where I know people have heard couples arguing. Like right now, I live in a building, and the other night I heard a husband and wife screaming and hollering, and in my mind I'm like, should I go help? But I didn't. And to be honest with you, I didn't even call the police. And in my mind, I'm like, somebody else will call them. I'm just sitting there like somebody else is going to call. And he's screaming, saying, let me out, move. And she's screaming at him. And I'm like, they're just arguing. I'm going to stay out of their business. I'm going to mind my business. But you never know how serious this situation or scenario will be. And I know a lot of viewers may have been in a scenario such as yours, an abusive relationship, and wanted somebody to help, or have witnessed an abusive relationship or heard somebody arguing. And me personally, in my life, I don't think I know any friends that are in a scenario like you're in, that was married, that's going through an abusive scenario. But again, I don't know, because like you said, it's a facade.
Yeah. It's absolutely 100% fake on the outside.
Wow.
I mean, when you look at the men who have killed their wives and you go on their Facebook pages, you would think that their lives were 100% perfect. And so the idea that you could know that someone was in that situation is so hard, because one of the primary things that abusers do is they isolate and they make sure that you think it's your fault, that they are this monster,
Yeah.
and if you could do better, then they wouldn't be like this.
Wow, and it's your fault.
And when you're in that mindset and in that mentality that everything is actually your fault and that you're the reason that this is happening to you, that's not something that you're going to go and tell someone. I turned my husband into a monster.
Right.
Like, you're going to be like, oh, if I can just do better, then this will change.
Wow.
I can fix it. I'm the person responsible for all of this. And since I'm the person responsible, I know that there can be better and that I can do better and that all of this is on me.
Yeah. So thank God for your neighbor. So what happened?
Absolutely.
So what happened there?
So in regards to why I got thrown off the balcony twice, he had locked me out of the house, and I decided that I was going to get my kids out. So I broke through the glass, and at that point, I was trying to unlock the door so that I could get inside and get to my kids. And he grabbed my arm, and he actually hit it so hard that it broke my wrist. He shredded my arm, and
you're screaming and hollering at this point, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But he realized that I wasn't going to give up, and so he came out and he pushed me over the ledge of the balcony. I did not lose consciousness that time, so I decided to come back around. I had sprained my ankle on that fall. Thankfully, I fell on my leg. I crawled back around, crawled up the steps again, and I was going to get my kids out. He came back out and threw me over. That time my head hit the rocks and I ended up with a brain injury.
Wow. And you're just trying to get your kids out.
I was trying to get my kids out. Yeah.
You felt like they were in danger with him because of the things that was going on.
Absolutely.
Wow. That is. So you end up going unconscious?
I did.
Knocked out?
I did. And
how long were you out? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
When I regained consciousness, I tried to go up the stairs again. I didn't think anyone was there to help me, and so I was just determined that I was going to do it myself. Fortunately, when I got up to the top, the police lights came, and someone had actually called the police at that point.
Wow, that just makes my hair stand up on my arm, that somebody actually stepped in to help.
Absolutely.
Heard the cries and the screaming and noticed that you needed help.
I have no doubt in my mind that if that person had not stepped in, I would be dead.
Wow. So what ended up happening? So when the police came, they put you in the ambulance came.
The ambulance, and then they actually let my kids come with me, which was unheard of. Typically, my kids would have gone to state custody.
Okay.
But they let my kids come with me to the hospital, and my ex-husband was arrested.
Wow.
For the abuse that night. He ended up with 6 felony counts.
Wow. So that's the amazing part about this. It takes the community, right?
Absolutely.
To speak out, to help, to recognize. In the beginning, Sarah was like, he's not the one for you. At some point in the middle, your neighbors are rescuing you.
Yeah.
Did you, at that moment, say, this is it, I'm not going back? Or did you decide to try again for your kids or for...
At that point, that was when I officially left.
Okay.
However, like I said, there were multiple police reports prior to this.
Wow.
And actually that last 2 years were so volatile that I had admitted myself to the psychiatric ward once, and I had attempted suicide once.
And attempted suicide?
Yeah.
All because of the scenario you was going through with him?
Absolutely. I was 100% convinced that I was completely worthless. My children were better off without me in their life, that the entire world would be better off if I was gone. because I knew that I was the problem.
Wow.
And I was creating this monster, and I was creating all of these issues in our lives. And I truly believe that, because when you're without community, the only reflection of yourself that you have is yourself and whoever you talk to. And
Isolation. Wow.
so at that point, the only reflection I had was what I looked at in the monster's eyes, you know? And so the way that he saw me was the way I began to see myself. And because he had me so convinced that I was worthless and that I destroyed every person, everything that I touched was something that would turn out badly. And I was convinced that the world was better off without me in it.
So with you being you went to the psych ward. You didn't put yourself in.
I did. So I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter, and all I could think about was, I don't want to bring a baby into this world. I don't want to bring a baby into this situation. I don't know that I can care for another baby. I don't know that this is okay. And for days, all I thought about was how to escape. Like, what about a car with carbon monoxide? Like, just envisioning, like, how can I die? How can I get out of this situation? Because I can't do this. And so I actually admitted myself to the psychiatric ward. I was like, I don't know what to do, but I know this isn't a place I want to be. And when I went, it was very interesting because I was like, I think I'm bipolar. I don't know what's going on. Like,
could it have been the hormones from being pregnant? I mean, did they bring that option up? I guess
they didn't, because when they heard my story and what had happened and what was happening at home, I had self-diagnosed myself as bipolar. However, when I told the doctor that I thought I was bipolar, she said, maybe situationally. And I didn't understand what she meant at that point, but what she meant was the highs and the lows of an abusive relationship will swing you up and down and up and down, and you become basically bipolar because you're so far up. When those passionate highs are there, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm on top of the world. The person that's supposed to love me loves me in all the best ways. And then when it's down, it's like you're at fault for everything that has gone wrong in the entire world and in your family. And so when she said that situationally I could be bipolar, I didn't understand what that meant. I just thought, yeah, she's agreeing with me.
Right.
So obviously all of this is my fault.
And you're even at risk of losing your kids by checking in, right?
Yeah.
Because you can be deemed as crazy. He could use that against you to try to control you, or
he did threaten to use that against me, actually. Which was one of the reasons that I didn't leave when I checked out of the hospital. So when I checked out, I did stay with a friend for a week because they had talked to me about not going back. And unfortunately, we had a controlling, check each other's everything, what's going on, and he had a history of me finding underwear in cabinets and lipstick under the seat of the car, and so I checked his email, and he was talking to a girl about her camouflage panties, and I decided
and you still didn't leave him.
I decided at that point that I needed to win him back for our kids' sake, because a child deserves a whole family. And I went to counseling at a local church, and they actually counseled me that the Bible said that a wife should be able to bring her husband to see Jesus. And if I was a good wife, that's what I would be doing. So what was I doing wrong that he was behaving this way?
So hold on. So they are basically telling you that it's your fault, and you need to bring your husband to Jesus, and you need to fix it.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, that's something that we see a lot in the church, is men are the head of the household, the authority figure, but they hold no responsibility, and instead they use one single verse out of the Bible to tell women that they're responsible.
Wow.
And
to be honest, even with that, like, I consider myself Southern or old fashioned, so I do know about the whole man of the household thing, but it isn't to be used as a way of stomping on your family or your wife and rubbing your feet on them to keep them down.
No, it's not supposed to be.
She's supposed to undergird you and lift you up and be there for you, but you also have to support her and pour into her just as much as she's pouring into you.
Yes, absolutely. So when you look at the verses that talk about submission, and you look at the verses that talk about men, take care of your family, you're the head of the household, none of those verses mean what people twist them to mean. If you look at them in the old Aramaic, then that's absolutely not what you're talking about.
Wow.
So Ezer Kenegdo, which is only used in reference to God and to women. It's never used in reference to men or to war or anything else. It means the lifter up or the life bringer. And it's talking about how women are life bringers. We are people who are there to lift up and to encourage life and growth. And it's talking about the importance of women, not the submission, not the doormat of women.
So here you are in an abusive relationship, thrown off balconies, arms shredded, hit your head on the rock. You know,
I mean,
possible.
that had not happened at that point.
Okay.
When they counseled
When
me.
they counseled you, okay. You've gone through all of this stuff, and you're still thinking about staying there, winning your husband back, and being with him for your family's sake.
Yeah.
Even to the point where you check yourself in to get help.
Yeah.
And even having suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
So what happened with the suicide attempt or thoughts? Or...
So I went through my pregnancy. I had my daughter. Shortly after I had my daughter, ended up having to have several surgeries. And after one of those surgeries, he had gone out partying the night of my surgery, came back, passed out.
Were those surgeries from abuse or just physical
just
stuff that was
physical
going on?
stuff
Okay.
that was going on.
Okay.
Came back, he passed out, and I didn't have pain medication because I had to take a cab back from my surgery because he was unavailable because he was out partying.
Wow.
And so I asked him to get up and go get my pain medication. He said no, told me that I could get it myself. He hadn't brought our vehicle back, which we shared. And so I was like, how am I supposed to do that? I just had surgery. He was like, ride a bike if you need it that bad. So I rode my bike to go get pain medication. Ended up the first place I went was closed, so I had to go to a different pharmacy. Rode my bike over to the other pharmacy. I think it ended up being like 2.5, 3 miles by the time that I finished. And then I went back. My kids had not been taken care of. The house was trashed. I had a 3-year-old and a baby at that point in time. I wasn't supposed to lift over 10 pounds. I think Jayla was 12 at that point. And I asked him to get up and help with breakfast. He refused, shoved me out of his room.
Wow.
I went back in through the other door and I was like, you need to get up. Well, at that point, I had grown up in an abusive situation, and I had sworn that if I ever had kids, I would never be violent or angry loud. Like, those were like very, very important to me.
Yeah.
And I lost my temper, and I threw a book at him and I yelled at him, and ended up on the dining room floor, pinned in a violent situation, obviously. And I remember thinking, I promised that this would never be the case. And since I had started it, again, I was conditioned at this point to believe that everything was my fault. And since I had started it by waking him up, by asking him for help, by burdening him, but it was my fault that I had started it. And so I started ruminating on that, and I did have painkillers in my system, but all I could think about was my kids will be better off without me. And he told me that I was worthless as a mother, and if I couldn't even take care of my own kids and get them breakfast. And I believed him. And so I wrote notes to the kids, and I was like, I know your lives will be better without me. I'm so glad I was able to bring you into the world. I'm sorry that I can't take care of you. I wrote a note to my mom. And I went to the neighbor's house because I knew he couldn't take care of my kids.
And leave him with him.
I went to the neighbor's house and I said, "Hey, would you mind checking on my kids every few hours?" And I didn't think that I seemed like anything was off, but for some reason she knew. And I took that bottle of pills and I walked until I found an alley with a secluded spot and some trees. And I went ahead and I took handfuls of those pills until I finished that entire bottle that I had just refilled that morning. And my neighbor called the police. She knew that something was wrong and she said, "Hey, I don't know what's going on, but I think that you guys need to find this girl." And if she hadn't done that, then I would be dead.
They just found you passed
Passed
out?
out. Yep.
Wow. On painkillers. Painkillers.
Yep.
So after they found you, you end up going back into, they had to pump your stomach, or what
They
was
had to
this?
pump my stomach, and then a friend of mine stayed.
Did your husband show up there? Or?
He didn't even come to the hospital. Yeah.
This is- And even for the viewers, right? Like, as men, we have a responsibility to another man to hold him accountable, I think. And if there's a scenario where you are a man and you know that your guy friend is very, very controlling or maybe abusing his wife, you know, would you step up and say something? Would you intervene? Because, like you said, it says in there in the Bible, and they hold this quote sometimes, you know, a woman should submit to her husband. You know, and as men, we take ownership. Like, my son. Like, I love my son, you know, but that's my son. Like,
Right.
I don't want no other man or no other woman discipline my son because it's my son.
Yeah.
You know, let me talk to my kid. You know, you don't put him aside and tell him what's right or what's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I also can imagine that goes and carries on into relationships and marriages too. Like, that's my wife, that's my kid.
Mm-hmm.
You don't tell me what to do with my family. You know, but how many guys will hold another guy accountable for that? Like, hey, listen, I do understand that's your family, but you need help. Like, you can't hit her. You can't do
Very
this.
rare.
And even the bruises, like some things you can't hide with makeup or
Yeah.
a limp or, you know, just the way you look and smile. You can tell when something's wrong.
Yeah.
But yet here you are to the point of being brainwashed almost,
Mm-hmm.
to the point of feeling worthless. You go take all of these pills willing to leave your kids with somebody who is abusing you because you're that brainwashed. Like, he will take care of you better than I will because I'm worthless. And you wake up in the hospital.
Yes. And I was angry. I was so angry when I woke up
Angry, why? At him?
because I had failed. Because I felt like such a failure that I had even failed suicide.
Wow.
And that was my first thought when I woke up. Was,
Wow.
you're such a failure you can't even commit suicide properly.
But thank God for the neighbor.
Thank God for the neighbor.
Man.
When
The
my kids came
community.
to see me in the hospital, I realized that they needed me here, and I made a promise to myself and to them that I would never do that again. Because they came and they were wearing horrible clothing and they were dirty.
Did he bring
and
them?
He did.
Okay.
And I realized that they needed me at that point. I didn't know that I could do the best job, but I knew I'd at least keep them clean and
Yeah.
fed.
Yeah.
And I realized that was something that needed to happen.
Wow. And the thing about it is the perseverance that you took. Like, you had to thrive. You had to push yourself. How did that process happen? Because, again, you're in the hospital. You took the pills. You're feeling it at your lowest with your family, with your husband, with life. Your friends have already talked to you. Like, how did you turn that?
So there was a very quick, so after that suicide attempt, it did not take long for the last episode of abuse to happen. There was an episode with a gun between then and when I left, and then I finally, I couldn't go back. I knew after watching him choke me and waiting for the light to go out of my eyes because of the dishes, I knew that if I went back, I would be dead.
And he put a gun on you? Or he had a
that
gun?
was prior.
Prior? Okay.
There's so many stories. It's kind of awful.
But even then, when you're going through it, did it not seem as bad? Did you not You just kept thinking to
I
yourself, you
just
need to
kept thinking
repair your family.
it was my fault, and I needed to repair my family. The church had told me that it was up to me, and I didn't have people that I could go to about it because I didn't want them to see. I didn't want them to see the monster that he had turned into. I didn't want them to see what I had created. In my head, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
Even though he was that monster all along, I didn't see it that way. I saw that this was my creation. And so it was embarrassing, it was humiliating, it was, I was a college educated, like, social work was my major in college. So I'm not supposed to be abused. Like, this isn't really abuse. And until he put his hands on me, I would never have acknowledged any of the mental stuff as abuse. Because, I had a degree in that. I was bigger than that. I was stronger than that. I was way more powerful than that. But domestic violence hits every demographic. It doesn't matter. It hits literally every demographic. And it's one of the only things that is so pervasive in every demographic that they cannot say one thing affects it more than another.
And the thing is, you wouldn't leave because you wanted to fix it for your family. But yet you never thought about leaving to save your family.
I mean, I thought about leaving. I had left him at this point several times.
Which I always go back.
But I always went back.
Okay.
I was always convinced, and that's normal. Most abuse victims do go back 7 times before they're either murdered or they leave permanently.
No.
And that's very common.
So you went through all of that. Tell me about Shannon now. From there to now. Like, you have a smile on your face. Are you still with him? Did you have to file stuff with the court? What happened? Like,
well, long story, obviously. But I did get out. I stayed 13 months in a domestic violence shelter. So the kids and I ended up sleeping on a bunk bed for 13 months. We did go through the court process. Family court finalized before his felonies finalized, so they refused to use any of his felonies in family court. And so he did get rights to my kids back. And
wow.
Yeah, which is also very common.
So this aggressive, almost suicidal, almost murderous guy still has custody to his kids?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that is unfortunately very common in domestic abuse cases. Currently, a lot of states do not recognize domestic violence as child abuse. And so watching your parent get beat does not qualify as actual child abuse.
Wow.
In a lot of states, only a few of the more progressive states will actually acknowledge that that has an impact on children.
Wow.
Even with all of the scientific research that backs that up. That is something that we're fighting. I have gone to the House and Senate in my state to speak about those things. We are getting ready to introduce a bill to protect children of domestic violence abusers.
That is needed.
And so I'm really excited about that, but we have to pass protection orders first. So one step at a time, but I do believe there's a lot of progress made. Right now, I am an artist, I am an advocate, and I am an adventurer.
Wow.
And my life has taken a tremendous turn. I have raised 2 incredible kids. My son is 13 and he is in advanced placement programs.
Okay.
My daughter tested the highest in her class for all of her stuff this year. She's in 3rd grade.
That is amazing.
And we have a beautiful home that is full of peace and laughter, and we have great relationships with each other. And we travel and we enjoy the world, and I'm an artist full-time.
Nice.
Well, I should say I'm a creative full-time because I do still write.
Okay.
So I do content for a cause. So when I find a cause that I believe in, I will do their search engine optimization and their creative writing. So if they need content or copy for their websites, that sort of thing. So I'm a creative for a living. And I try to paint the world as I see it with my emotions involved, and then I write about it. And you can find any of that at shannonjoy.art.
shannonjoy.art. Okay.
And
You
I
guys
just
should definitely look her up.
live life every day. I think that it is incredible that I have been able to go from a legacy of pain, because I grew up in abuse and I married a man who was abusive, and I decided that I was going to make daily choices that would change that legacy. And it's all about those small choices. So it's the choice to not call him when I was missing him. Abusive relationships are very much like a drug. You know it's not healthy, but you want that high, and you're willing to go through the pain to get the high. And so that was very difficult. When I got out of the hospital, I was still under the impression that there was nothing I could do, and that I would not be the best person to raise my kids, and that there was no way I could provide for them.
Wow. I remember this one time I got a phone call from you, and you was telling me that you was afraid to go into your house because you felt like he broke in.
Yeah.
And I was asking, like, how do you know this? You said there is a what?
There was a note with a knife on the table, and the note was talking about how much of a worthless mother I was and how horrible I was for not letting my children see their dad, and it was signed with a J. And
With his initial?
Yeah.
With the knife stuck in it on your table?
Mm-hmm.
And then as you came out of the house, I'm asking you, where is he at? And you could see him.
I could. He had stayed just outside of the protection order mandate, and he had parked his car there so he could watch me go in and out of my house. So he wanted to see the terror that he was inflicting.
And I even remember wanting to help, but also at the same time, I knew that you repeatedly have gone back to him. I felt helpless because you already had the police involved, and there's nothing that they can do. And your kids, as a friend, if I call the police, there's already an order. If you've already talked to other friends, they try to pull you in to get you out of the scenario. But a knife on the table, which is a direct threat, and you still had to be the mom. And this is the house that you and him, did y'all live in?
No, it was the house that I got right after the shelter. And so
he never lived in it?
No, he had never lived in it. He actually ended up stalking us for quite a while. He went into the school and threatened the school secretary. I mean, it was very intense. When people leave an abuser, that is actually the most dangerous time, and most frequently when they get killed. Because they consider you their property. Wow. And so by leaving, you're violating their control. And just like rape, domestic violence is not necessarily about the relationship, it's about the power and the control.
Control, yes, it is. Well, I thank God that you're still here. The crazy part about it is, even with you thinking about the suicide and wanting to leave your family and not be there for them because you felt like they're in a better place, it took years, and we talked about this off camera. You just now got an order, right? Mm-hmm. And what is this order?
So he has had Child Protective Services called on him 11 times in the past 8 years. His older daughter that I talked about earlier, she actually received a protection order last year, but my kids were still going to see him. It's been 8 years since I left him. 8 years.
8 years.
And Child Protective Services just finally decided that he was an unfit parent for my kids.
And every time their kids go over to see their father, you're worried, and that is mind-blowing to me. So now we have this protective order in place. So now they don't actually have to go over there. Is it supervised, or do they not have to go at all?
They don't have to go at all for now.
Okay.
We will need to go back to court, but at this point, until we can go back to court, Child Protective Services says that my kids do not need to see him. They are going to try and put him through another rehabilitation and supervised visitations and all of that. But
Wow.
depending on how that goes, he may or may not get custody back.
Wow. So I know that there's viewers out there wondering, like, she's going through all of this abuse, and he went to jail. And was there any real jail time? Was he facing any
he
real?
spent one night in jail.
One night.
One night.
Out of all that,
He
threats
so
throwing
he
you.
ended up with.
Was it because you didn't press charges?
Because
I know in
the
some
state
times-
pressed charges.
Okay.
He ended up convicted. He had 6 convictions on his record. They gave him a suspended imposition of sentence because it was his first offense. The first time that he had actually been charged, even though the police had been to our house multiple times. This was the first time he was actually charged with anything. So he was convicted of 6 counts of assault. And they decided to give him suspended imposition of sentencing, which means that he had no jail time for 5 years as long as he did not violate that. However, his parole officer, even when he did violate it, she would go before the judge and she would say, he violated in this regard. And they'd say, oh, well, let's give him 3 weeks to clean it up. And so he'd clean it up. He violated, I think, 4 or 5 times during the 5 years and never went to jail.
Wow.
And then got off of his probation, and now he has no one monitoring him.
Wow.
And that's why he's gone back to, obviously, not being a nice human for my children.
Wow. So for you guys that don't know, I know that we think that somebody of this magnitude probably has this horrible look, like tattoos, probably earrings, probably, I don't know, whatever the monster looked like in your mind. But the truth is, your monster, when I saw your monster, wasn't a monster. He looked like an ordinary, put together, well-mannered, like, amazing dude. When I met him, he was like, hey, how you doing?
Still a leader in the church.
Still a leader in the church, with a smile.
With a smile. And when my kids
Dr.
and him
Jekyll and Hyde.
moved into their new home, my son said, well, at least it doesn't have stairs so he can't push his new wife down.
Wow. And we don't even think about the trauma that we cause on the kids' mind who are watching this. 'Cause I even remember as a kid growing up, I had a cousin, and it's the reverse. My cousin, which is a female, would beat her man. And I would be up under the table, my heart racing. And I was screaming and hollering and telling them to stop. And I would hate to go over there to visit them.
Yeah.
But I remember how I felt. And that was one reason why I said I would never, ever yell or be in a violent scenario with my son or my kids either. I made that promise to myself too, because I was like, I couldn't bear it. I remember how afraid I was. But just listening to your story is crazy. How you wouldn't give up. You then went through the punishment, the pain, the reprogramming, to think that you was a bad person, but then the process that took place of you reprogramming yourself to realize that you was a good person.
Yeah.
And
And
finding
that
your help.
has been the biggest challenge. Even still, I still struggle with thoughts of feeling less than or unable or unworthy, or I wouldn't say a daily struggle anymore, but it is a very regular struggle still to this day. And I have found that trauma, whether it's from childhood, whether it's from an abusive partner, it changes your mind. Literally changes the way that the pathways in your mind work, your neural pathways. And it is possible to reprogram those, but again, it comes down to those daily decisions and thinking about what you're thinking about, and choosing something different than what you've known.
So now you surrounded yourself with an amazing boyfriend, right?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about him. Is he experiencing some of the things from your past? Does he have to pay for them? As in, some of your doubts and your disbeliefs, and does he have to reassure you?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. Okay.
I have been extremely fortunate in that regard, because he is the most patient, kind, loving human, like, ever.
Seems like an amazing guy.
I remember he started helping with the dishes, and I have a huge thing surrounding dishes. I mean, loading the dishwasher was the first thing that my ex critiqued, and then he threw me off a balcony and down a flight of stairs because
Wow.
I had left a load of dishes in the sink. And when his attorney talked to me when we were at the grand jury, to say whether or not they were going to charge him, his attorney said, "Is it not true? You said you would take care of the house if he worked a job." And I said, "Yes, that's true, but that never included the clause that he would try to kill me for not keeping up with the house."
Wow.
And so dishes were a huge trigger point for me. And the first time that he tried to do dishes, I started crying. And he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, you can't do dishes at my house."
Wow.
And so he's had to put up with a lot of different things along the way. We've been together almost 2 years now. And it has been a very slow process of deprogramming my idea of relationships and my idea of men in general.
Yeah.
Because my dad was the same way. And so it's been a process of trying to figure out what a healthy relationship looks like, and where those boundaries are, and having boundaries instead of just being someone who is either codependent or so independent that you can't be with another person.
Yeah.
And so I had hard walls, and walls are unhealthy.
They are.
Boundaries are healthy.
Yeah.
They're there to help both people grow.
Yeah.
And so trying to figure out where to break down walls and where to put up boundaries has been a huge challenge.
Cool.
But he's up for the challenge, so.
That's good. An amazing guy. So one last question I have for you. As far as counseling, did you have to go to counseling yourself? Did you incorporate your kids in going to counseling with you?
Yes.
Is it a family ordeal? And is it a constant thing, or that's something you did and you just stopped?
No, my kids actually have gone to counseling the entire time.
Okay.
Because I think it's important that they do learn healthy coping mechanisms, healthy traits, healthy ways to deal with the things that they go through. And since they have continued to go through things the entire time, I never wanted them to be without a voice.
Right.
And it's very common for kids to not be able to tell the other parent what's really happening.
Right.
Because they don't want to throw their parent. They still love the abusive parent.
Yeah.
That there's no question of that. That's their parent. And so a few things that I found with raising kids in that situation is try not to speak ill of the other parent, but never lie.
Even if they're abusive.
Even if they're abusive.
Wow.
So one of the things that I have basically on repeat is sometimes your dad doesn't make good choices. Sometimes your dad doesn't make good choices. All of our life comes down to our choices. And I try to make sure that they know that just because they have a dad who didn't make good choices, that does not influence who they are. Because so much of a kid's identity is built by who their parents are. And you want to make sure that you're not tearing down half of their identity while still not allowing that behavior to be okay.
I love that concept that you're saying here, simply because most women or men looking at this may say that you're taking on an abused woman's atmosphere or personality, like is in like protecting him. Like, listen, he's not a bad guy, just, whatever. But the truth is, you're protecting your future, which is your son and your daughter. Like, look, not everybody's good. There are some bad people out there, and the choices that they make does affect you, but it's up to you to control what parts you want to take out of these scenarios and build off of them.
So I don't believe in bad people. I believe in bad choices. I don't believe there are bad people in the world. I believe there are a lot of people out there who make horrible choices.
Yes.
And I don't think that they go down that route purposefully. I think that comes a lot of times from things that they've seen as children or things that they've experienced along the way. And it's like, if you get shot with a toxic arrow and you just let it sit there, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that's going to get better? No. It only heals if you pull it out and you clean that wound.
Yeah.
And so if someone has not bothered to clean a wound from something that happened to them in their past, that's just going to fester, and eventually that infection is going to spread.
Wow.
And unfortunately, a lot of times what that spread looks like is them taking their own toxic arrows and putting them in the people that are closest to them.
Wow. So earlier you said that you guys were just alike in the beginning when you met him. You know,
I did
there's a lot of
believe that.
similarities,
Yeah.
family similarities, and all the other stuff. And you came from an abusive dad.
Mm-hmm.
2 questions. Do you hate your dad?
I do not.
Do you hate your husband? Your
I
ex-husband?
do not.
That to me is huge, because a lot of people that go through an abusive scenario to where they're the blame for their failures or successes or, you know, shortcomings. It's like, you know, because I was here, I'm this victim. Like you say, you either pull it out, you fix it,
Mm-hmm.
or you allow it to stay in and fester. But you push through all of it, which is amazing. I love it. And you actually thought about your family. You found love again. You're moving forward your career. You found passion.
Mm-hmm.
You're writing and you're painting.
Mm-hmm.
And you found a new purpose for life. Because a lot of women who are in these scenarios feel like they can't find nobody else, or they're not worthy of being beautiful or accepting compliments from other men, or they can't do dishes right,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't want to accept somebody's help for doing the
That
dishes.
was a big one for me.
Yeah.
Is I went to being so independent that I didn't want to accept anything from anyone, and I was so afraid to break down those walls.
Wow.
And I think there are 2 directions that people go to take back control.
Mhm.
And that is, I'm going to take control and I am going to be so maybe promiscuous or because I want to control that aspect.
Wow.
Or the other direction, which is I'm never letting anyone in again. And that was the direction I chose to take, was I'm never letting anyone in.
Cool.
And I think that healing requires acknowledging where those pain points are and being like, oh, actually, even though I seem like I'm healthy and I have this huge corporate job and I went back to school, like I'm doing so much so that I don't have to actually form connections.
Wow. That is amazing. Well, again, I'm glad that you did not commit suicide. I thank God for your neighbor. I'm actually going to bring somebody very, very, very important on the set, because I want the world to see something, that there is life after a relationship. There's life after suicidal thoughts. There's life after decisions. Every choice that you make. And you said it best. Even when you're going through something bad, there are bad people. There are bad choices. In my mind, bad people, bad choices. But you're saying that there's not bad people. You should always look for the good in people that make bad choices also. You know, some of the things that he went through, you went through.
Mm-hmm.
But again, in the beginning of the book, beginning of this session, I told you guys, and in the beginning of this chapter, Unspoken Killer, that my suicidal attempt wasn't the first time when I had the gun to my head on my knee at the bed. My first time was in the car.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have never saw the +1. But you guys, give me 1 second. I'm going to bring my +1 in. Okay, and I want to show you guys my +1. Come here. Hey, buddy. So, again, the night when I was at the high school after the basketball game, here I was ready to commit suicide. Did not know that I couldn't see the light. All I saw was darkness, and I didn't understand what life was. And now, years later, by not making that choice and to survive, I have this little guy. This little guy is the life of me. His smiles, his laughter. And had I killed myself that night or the night with the gun, he wouldn't even be here. Stop, Jackson. Can you say hello? Can you say hi? No? But he is a life of me, and I never would have been able to see this. This is my plus one. I gave back to the world. Sit here for a second. Stop. I gave back to the world. I felt like the world was taken from me, and the devil was going to allow me with that spirit, that suicidal spirit, to take my life away. But instead, by being patient and sitting here and living life and just thriving one day at a time, I was able to create my plus one. And Jackson eventually is going to have a plus one. And that's how generations are started. That's how tradition is passed on from one person to the next. But he is my blessing, my plus one. But again, I was in so much darkness and I could not see light. All I thought about was just wanting to kill myself, just like you when you took the pills. And you couldn't even think of your family. I couldn't even think of him. I couldn't even see him. Mm-hmm. But as time passed, he became my everything. And in closing, do you have any closing remarks that you want to give?
Yes. One thing that I feel like everyone needs a reminder of sometimes is that everything in life is cyclical. So whether you want to look at the seasons or whether you want to look at the sun and the moon, everything in life has seasons and it's cyclical. So if you're at a low point right now, mm-hmm. that won't last forever.
It won't.
And there is hope. And I think that everyone needs to know that there is hope of something more, even at your darkest moments.
It is. And for anybody that's going through stuff like this, you want to wave at the camera? Anyone that's going through stuff like this, I want to let you know that you're not alone. We can face the unspoken killer together. Shannon and I and Jackson are here for you if you ever need anything at all. If you're going through an abuse scenario or situation, you're a man who knows another man who's abusing his wife, or a female who knows another female that's abusing her husband, don't be afraid to hold them accountable. Speak out. And I know you mentioned earlier about a church that, told you that you should be submissive, but also there's a church that you told me about off camera that told you to, that put you in with the right alignment that you should have been, helped you change your locks and help you do the things that needs to be done to move you through.
They helped me move. They took care of my kids. They really took care of me. And I think that the church holds a responsibility as an organization, as someone who claims to care about people. They have a responsibility to create healing
they do.
In the community. And I think by reinforcing that abusers are in the right, that is exactly against everything that the Bible says. And I think that the churches that are willing to say, okay, let's step up, let's do what we can, let's help the widows and the orphans and the kids and the women that are going through this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that is a responsibility that they hold.
It is. And again, I want to tell you guys, we love you guys. We thank you for tuning in. And whenever you're facing anything that you're going through, just remember, if Shannon can make it out of her abusive relationship, seek help, recover, move forward, see the brightness in her life, then you can. And if I can, through the darkness of the suicide, see the light at the end of the tunnel with my plus one and continue to find the happiness that's here, then you can. And we're here for you. We love you. Feel free to comment, follow us, like us here. And we look forward to talking to you again. See you later. Say bye.
Say bye.
Can you say bye?